Chapter class. Let's go ahead and get started. I'll pray for us. Father, thank you for your word and the beauty of your word and the clarity of your word and how the main ideas in your word are so clear and so simple and invite us to walk in the way of life. Father, so much in your word holds out the joy of the promise of total transformation, and yet often we as your people get hung up in the weeds, want to talk about confusing things, and I pray that you give us wills to walk in your way, to accept your truth. And I pray you give us humility to recognize that there are things that may be beyond us, and that's okay. Would you empower our study anyway? And I pray that you would use all of it as a means of grace to help us turn more and more from self-rule to your rule and to long for the day when the earth is filled with the knowledge of the glory of God as the waters fill the sea. Father, we make this prayer not because we can claim to be better than other people inherently, because inherently we're not better than other people. We're all clay from the same lump, but we can address you as our Father, and you can fashion us because Jesus has lived the perfect life in our behalf, has died for our sins, and promised our total conformity to your will one day. Would you hasten that day even through something as simple as a college lecture? For it's in Christ's name that we pray. Amen. Do this. Note takers. Oh, I'm sad for that. Well, what we're going to look at today is the story of Balaam and Balaam's curse. And we've spent a lot of time in Old Testament literature and interpretation looking at the beginning of the Bible. We've seen how the beginning is connected to nearly everything else in God's Word. From here on out, we're going to just hit highlights and look at things. And one of the things we want to look at is this story. But this story is a difficult story because, well, several reasons. One, usually in the Old Testament, there aren't text critical issues. That is, get any copy of the Bible, read it, it will read it exactly the same. That's not the case for all the passages in this text. I, as a teacher, have tried to do my due diligence with this story, but I have to admit there are parts of this story that are very, very confusing to me. And so we'll look at this, but realize it's with an open hand. There's a lot that's challenging. And speaking of challenging or interesting, or maybe you had an aha moment, as you work through the homework, did you find anything interesting as you read the passages for today? Yes. Alan, and I imagine, Alan, you found that as confusing as I do. Alan, or anyone, did you pick up that there's a parallel between that story and the Moses story, where God tells Moses to go, and then within a few sentences, God is about to kill Moses? And I didn't pick it up until I was trying to reread it in the Hebrew this morning. But when it said, I think, Alan, the one you referenced, it said something like the Lord's wrath burned again, or I think their Elohim's wrath burned. And that struck me because I said to myself, I wonder if that's the exact same phrase. And as I looked it up, it is the exact same phrase. So there's this weird thing going on with this story. Is Balaam a good guy? Is he a bad guy? Is he sometimes bad and sometimes good? And when you work through this story, there's a feature of it that would be very difficult to see in translation. But there are two different words for God in that story. The Elohim word, which is the normal plural word, and then toward the end, Balaam starts using El singular, and so that's weird. So glad I'm not the only one who reads through the text and finds that unusual. Caleb.
So why does Balaam refer to God as his God?
Yeah. How many of you picked that up in the story where Balaam calls God and the Lord my Elohim? So that was weird. And Caleb, I'm glad you're seeing the exact same thing I'm seeing, because that's a little confusing, is it not? A problem. And another Caleb, and I imagine you're going to have a very good observation as well.
So when I was reading the passages of Balaam, like later in the Old Testament,
Yeah. I mean, when we look at the whole story, we're going to see that Balaam is the one who finally gives the advice to the king to find the most beautiful pagan women he can and get them to intermarry. And if the king will do that, then the end result will be Israel will become idolaters and God will be able to curse them. And if we go all the way to the New Testament, Balaam is listed as a false prophet in the early chapters of Revelation. And so when we come to this, we have a difficulty. We have lots of difficulty. And I appreciate a question JP brought to me on Friday about a passage where I think it was in Chronicles where the Lord sends out a messenger, and in one account it's an angel, but then in the parallel account it's Satan. And like you read that and you think, okay, what's going on there? And you probably couldn't pick up on it in English, but that same bizarre feature is happening in this text, because the angel that shows up, it says, I am here to oppose you or something. And in the text, it says to be as, or to act as Satan to you, to oppose you. And then the second one, the angel repeats that. And in the Greek translation, it says, I am here to be a diabolos to you. And it's like you read those stories and you think, what in the world is going on? It's like everything about this story is confusing because it seems so different from everything else that we read. Yeah, I mean, to thwart ultimately Balaam, and Balaam does a lip service thing. Oh, if the king filled my whole house with silver and gold, I couldn't. But then by the time we've read through the whole thing, like he did, And so we're kind of faced with this dilemma of, like, how do we understand this story? And in studying this, it's always to step back and to say, and I'm terribly guilty of this, I can get in the weeds as quick as anybody, but to step back and say what's clear in this story. And what's clear is that Balaam knows that there's going to be a Messiah, and that Messiah's kingdom is going to flourish, and that Messiah is going to be the successful new Adam. I think what we're to see in this Leviticus Numbers section, one is that Leviticus and Numbers is a reminder to God's people that they're not living in Eden anymore. And nearly everything about their lives, everything about the normal way they interact with the world, nearly everything makes them unclean because they're not living in Eden anymore. They've ushered in death, they've ushered in rebellion, they've brought in problems, and they're excluded. God is calling them into the Garden of Eden. In fact, in Hebrew, that's the name of the book Leviticus, God calling them to come into the Garden of Eden. And they can't go in because they're not people who can live in Eden. And so when we come to this story, we see that 40 years of punishment in the wilderness has not reformed Israel's heart. And I think the truth that God would tell us is that God can't punish you into being a holy person. God can make you stand up straight. God can make you say yes, sir, and no, sir. God can make you follow a schedule, but you would be doing it to avoid the consequences. You might have heard older parents, from the 50s say, I can't make you do it, but I can make you wish you had, and it's like, well, God could do that too. God could make our life so miserable, but God isn't so concerned with getting things checked off on a checklist. God wants to make us different people. God wants to make us with real hearts, where we really do love other people and really do love God, and Israel wasn't successful at that. So when God's people outside of Eden hear someone who's a prophet of God, should we always just take that at face value? Or are there times when the Bible would say that there are wolves in sheep's clothing? And would you ever expect that someone who's been at this a while would be very good at fooling people? Do we face that challenge today? Have you ever followed someone and just been totally convinced they're, the Lord's person, and then, like, something happens and you realize, I was so deceived in this, and two, that person was living this completely different life that nobody knew about? Does this story have anything to do with that? How do we understand this person who speaks prophetically for God? And how does this story speak to our relationships with non-believers? That is, our close relationships with non-believers. Have you ever had a friend who meets somebody and says, I know they're not a Christian, and I know, but, and usually, have you seen how pretty she? No, people usually aren't that, but it's like, I'll be good to her. I'm going to help her come to Jesus. I mean, have you ever heard people talk like that? Or a young lady says, I know he's a pagan, but we're going to, he promised he's going to come to Bible study with me, and I'll help him come to Jesus. And just in terms of the history of the world, how many times does that work out well? in your opinion? I mean, maybe there are times, but generally it works the other way, doesn't it? I'm going to help lead them to Jesus, and usually they're going to help lead me to not Jesus. Well, maybe in the whole thing, maybe that's what we're going to do in this. What does it mean to be a false prophet? JP. It's even worse than that in Hebrew. In Hebrew, it says he no longer nahashed. And nahash is the word snake. He didn't snake anymore. He was snaking up until that point. And you're going to probably guess that word snake is connected to what story? Oh my goodness. Like there's a lot going on here. The whole question is, this: how does God create a people who are going to love goodness? How do you get people in the restored Garden of Eden who want God to be God and who want to love other people as themselves? And what we're seeing in this story is that Israel's not getting there. God is calling them back to Eden, but the problem is their lives. Thus it is written, the first man, Adam, became a living being. The last Adam became a life-giving spirit. When we read these stories in the Old Testament, ultimately we need to ask the question, what is this story telling me about Jesus? What does Leviticus tell me about Jesus? What does Numbers tell me about Jesus? What does Balaam tell me about Jesus? Because Jesus has succeeded in getting people who can live with a holy God forever. And we've seen that when you read the stories, what we need to realize is these stories are recapitulating themselves. And so when Balaam is going out and kind of half obeying God, that's the same thing Balaam's doing. He's going out and the anger of the Lord burned against him. Why is that? And I have to admit, trying to think through, is the text presenting Balaam like Moses? Obviously, Moses is in heaven with God because he appears and talks to Jesus on the Mount of Transfiguration. Is Balaam in heaven with God? It seems like everything said about him is always false. False prophet, a pseudo prophetes. And so why are they using similar language for both stories? If the stories are recapitulating themselves, why do you have this imperfect prophet Balaam and then God's leader Moses? And perhaps, I don't know, we're all reading through this together, but perhaps it's showing us that imperfect leaders don't get people back to Eden. Moses can only get God's people to the field of thorns, And Balaam, who's maybe a false prophet, ends up getting Israel judged because he comes up with a clever way to trip Israel up by having them intermarry with beautiful pagan women. These stories are recapitulating themselves, and that whole a beautiful woman leading a man's away from obedience to God. I mean, are we meant to read that story all the way back to the Adam and Eve story, where Paul is saying Adam wasn't deceived. He knew they were going to get kicked out, but apparently he's picking the beauty of Eve over following God. And I wonder if, in terms of the meta-narrative, there's only one son of God who ever can marry a daughter of Adam and not have her turn his heart away. And he does it by taking her heart of stone away and giving her heart of flesh. And he does it by picking a unlovely woman and turning her into the most beautiful woman who ever lived. You wonder how these stories are interacting with each other. The approach Germans give this term is Heilsgeschichte, salvation story, I guess it means. And then English writers talk about redemptive historical exegesis. That's what I've been trained in. That's what I think the New Testament is doing. And that's how we're reading these Old Testament stories. We're trying to locate the story in the meta-narrative and say, how does the story relate to the meta-narrative as a whole? Hebrews 2:1 says, "Therefore, since we are surrounded by so great a crowd of witnesses, let us lay aside every weight and sin which clings so closely, and let us run with endurance the race that's set before us, looking unto Jesus, the person who starts our faith, the archegos, and the person who perfects our faith, the teleutes, I think." How do you run this race where so many in heaven are watching and all the people in heaven are plagued with sins just like we're plagued with sins, and yet they're there? How do we do it? We do it by looking to Jesus. If anyone has ever conquered sexual sin, they've done it by the power of Jesus, who lived a sexually pure life. If anyone knows how to follow God in a difficult situation, they did it by looking to Jesus, who followed God in a difficult situation. The clarity of the story is clear. We're meant to look to Jesus as the one who can fix the things that are wrong. Ultimately, all Christians are on a journey out of slavery to sin and into the freedom of restored Eden. If you want to know how to read the Bible, that's how you read the Bible. What we're doing in our lives now is mimicking what the people in the Old Testament did then. They left slavery, they're going back to Eden. The problem is they don't get there in the Old Testament. So God's plan A all along was for the new Adam to come, the new Adam to live a perfectly obedient life, and the new Adam to make it to the new Eden, and then figure out a way to get all those who would ever be connected to him able to live in Eden, perfectly transformed, perfectly holy, perfectly at peace with a holy God. That's how you read the story of the Bible. We're all on that same journey. And I would say it this way: any marauding army could drive the Canaanites out of Israel. Just get a good enough army, make them mean enough, and just run them out, and you don't have any Canaanites in Israel. The problem is, you and I, it's not the Canaanites out there, it's the Canaanite that lives right here in my heart. How do you get that Canaanite out of Eden? And the only way is by Jesus, the super Joshua, who can get the Canaanites out of our heart, who can get the Canaanite flesh that we inherited from Adam out of our hearts to bring us in to the true land flowing with milk and honey. Numbers says this, then the people of Israel set out and camped in the plains of Moab beyond the Jordan at Jericho. And Balak, the son of Zippor, saw all that Israel had done to the Amorites, the talkers, that's what Amorites means. And Moab was in great dread of the people because they were many, and Moab was overcome with a fear of the people of Israel. So what we have in this story is Israel's about to enter the promised land. And it's a shadow version of God's people re-entering Eden. The problem is they still have the Canaanites in their hearts. They're not a people who can live at peace with a holy God. So Moses has taken them, come here. They are right here in the story in the field of thorns, Abel Shittim. Moses is going to be on Mount Pisgah, and he's not going to be able to go in, but the people are about to go in, and this king is trying to keep them out of Eden. Moab said to the elders of Midian, and did you pick up in the story that this is the descendant of Lot's older daughter, and this is the descendant of Abraham's third wife, Keturah? These are people who knew at one time the true God, but they've embraced idolatry, and now they're opposing the people trying to get back to the Garden of Eden. I wonder if that's a story for us. How many times have you seen godly families who have children, they just turn away from God and they turn into like just committed pagans, not just pagans, but I'm going to destroy anybody who wants to walk with God. How many people have you seen who've done that in life, where they've gone to a conservative school and then decided, oh, I'll make my money by saying everything in Christianity is false? How many times have you seen that? Isn't this something that happens over and over? And so now the people are saying, this people lick up all around us like the ox licks up the grass of the field. So Balak, son of Zippor, who was the king of Moab, he should have known better than this, to worship foreign gods, but he didn't. King of Moab at the time sent messengers to Balaam, son of Beor at Pethor, which is near the river in the land of the people of Moab, to call him away, saying, behold, a people has come out of Egypt. They cover the face of the earth and are dwelling opposite to me. Okay, in this class, how many times have we looked up the meaning of names? A lot. And of those times when we have looked up the meaning of names, how many of times has that helped us understand a biblical story?
A lot. People named their children back then, not so much as we name them now.
So here, that's right. So here's the thing. What does this guy's name mean? And so here's my position. We don't need to know. It's unimportant. It's just one of those details. It doesn't matter. He could be named anything. The meaning of his name isn't important to the story at all. Let's skip it. Come now, curse this people for me, since they are too mighty for me. Oh, you're wondering why I don't tell you what the name means? Because if I tell you what every name means, are you ever going to look up the names for yourself? Come now, curse this people for me, since they are too mighty for me. Perhaps I will be able to defeat them and drive them from the land. For I know he whom you bless is blessed, and him whom you curse is cursed. This is a spiritual picture of the forces of evil trying to keep God's people out of restored Eden. And they go to a guy named Balaam to do it. And the whole Bible would say this: no weapon that is fashioned against you will succeed. You shall refute every tongue that rises against you in judgment. This is the heritage of the servants of the Lord, and their vindication is from me, declares the Lord. There is no one who's going to be able to keep God's people out of the restored Garden of Eden, because Jesus never lost any battle. Lots of battles were lost in the Old Testament. Jesus never fails at anything. Jesus is going to get his people back. Why? Because the Lord will fight for you. The Lord is the true Moses. The Lord is the true Joshua. The Lord is the true prophet, priest, and king. And the Lord will get his people back to his land flowing with milk and honey. Jesus said, I give them eternal life, and they will never perish, and no one will snatch them out of my hand. And my Father who has given to me is greater than all, and no one will snatch them out of my Father's hand, and I and my Father are one. If my salvation ultimately depends on me, I will go to hell. Because I know me. I know what I'm like. I know my flaws and failures, and I know the confusion I can have, and I know the overwhelming of emotions, but the truth of the Bible is that my salvation does not depend on me. My salvation depends on the sovereign Lord who created heaven and earth. And that sovereign Lord says to anyone, all who call on the name of the Lord will be saved. If you want God to run your life and to not come part but come take over, you come to God like that, God says, you're in my hand, and nobody including you, is ever going to get you out. You come to me in helpless reliance, and blessed are the spiritually bankrupt because they own heaven. You come like that, you're going to make it. You come and say, well, I know you're called Lord, but will you take 50% of my life? Can I give you 50% of my life? Will you still say, if I give you 51%? That's not the deal. The deal is calling on the name of the Lord. The deal is coming to one who can radically save. And everyone who does that is going to end up in the garden. Not one single person is going to be left out. So in this narrative, is Balaam a prophet, or is he a false prophet? Well, let's look at the text and see what the text say. Joshua 13:22 says, Balaam also, the son of Beor, was one who practiced divination, and he was killed by the sword by the people of Israel among the rest of their slain. So when God told Israel, go kick the Canaanites out, one of the people who was killed was Balaam. It says Balaam practiced divination. And so that's this word right here, the one constantly practicing divination. They slaughtered him, is what the text says. And this is what the text says about people who practice divination. There shall not be found among you any who burns his son or his daughter as an offering. So that's what pagan people did. There shall not be anyone among you who practices divination. Can you see? This is the word "the," so don't count that. can you see that those words are exactly the same words? They're not similar or sort of. They're exactly the same word. God says, don't let anyone be among you who does that. Anyone who tells fortunes, or anyone who snakes. Okay? So I guess that's what they're doing with this word, but Nahash in Hebrew is the word snake, and this is the way you say intensify that. And so anybody who intensely snakes, don't let them live. And Peter says, forsaking the right way, they've gone astray. They have followed the way of Balaam, the son of Beor, who loved gain. So he was the guy who said, God will so bless you if you send me your money. I wonder if there are people like that today. But he was rebuked for his own transgression, and a speechless donkey spoke with a human voice and restrained the prophets. Madness. In Revelation, Jesus sends messages to the 7 churches there in Asia Minor. And he said, I have a few things against you. You have some there who hold to the teaching of Balaam. Who taught Balak to put a stumbling block before the sons of Israel so that they might eat food sacrificed to idols and practice sexual immorality. Balaam's the one who came up with that. He said, I can't curse. I know the Lord wants me to bless, but if you want to mess those people up, just get beautiful pagan women to marry them, and those beautiful pagan women will turn their hearts toward idolatry. All that's happening is they're at Abel Shittim, at the Abel Shittim crossing. And I imagine we've talked before that Jesus was baptized in the Jordan River. Do you know that we think we know exactly where that happened? Would it surprise you if there's been a church right there since 150 AD celebrating Jesus being baptized in the Jordan River? I wonder if those stories are connected. Like, that's the place where Joshua, maybe this is good literature, like incredibly good literature. The theme of the false prophet, do you pick up who the first false prophet in the Bible is? Somebody who says to you, I know the Bible says blank, but, right? Have you heard that before? So, do you hear in that lisping statement, do you hear that first line? Did God really say? Do you see how it's a theme in the story? And it's always a license to sin. There are false teachers throughout the Bible. They're everywhere. God says that they're actually a blessing, but because it ultimately shows who's going to follow God and who isn't. it's a blessing like the darkness is a blessing because it helps you understand the light. How could we understand how beautiful the light was unless we experienced the darkness? They're teachers of smooth things. I can tell you, as a person who served as a local church pastor, it's easy to only tell people what they want to hear. If you come to my church and all you ever hear from me is, you are a great person, you have great potential, just tap into your resources, you're going to do good things in life. I mean, who could ever resist that, right? Go kind of your personal trainer pep talk, right? Versus a true minister who'll say, this is what God's word says, and you may be out of a line here. And if you're out of line, this is how it plays out. Teachers of smooth things. Walter Elwell says this as under his entry for false teacher: a spokesman, herald, or messenger falsely speaking for or on behalf of someone else. And realize the people who are really good at this are exactly the same people who are really good at being spies. They're going to take great lengths to look exactly like the real thing. And Paul says this to the elders of the church at Ephesus. So this is a place where Paul had worked for years. He had trained them. He held classes every day for years in Ephesus. And this is what Paul says: I know that after my departure, fierce wolves will come in among you, not sparing the flock, and from among your own selves will arise men speaking twisted things. Listen, the greatest enemy you have to worry about is not someone who's going to come from a foreign country and speak to you. That is never going to succeed in a million years. The people that you have to worry about are people like me, who stand behind a pulpit and teach, because you're going to have to constantly ask, is this person a true teacher, or is this person who's using words to pretend and really out to teach me not to believe God's word? False teachers are a problem. That's why I say in all my classes all the time, don't believe anything that I say unless you see it in Scripture. Be a Berean. Go to God's word, to the testimony, to the Torah. If they don't speak like this, it's because there is no dawn. When somebody gets up and says, I know the Bible says, but, I know that people have always thought, but, that's a real key. Be very, very, very careful of that person. Because false prophets don't come from the outside. False prophets from among your own selves. This is a group of elders on their knees praying on the beach before Paul sails, and Paul is saying there are going to be false teachers who come from you, the elder board at Ephesus. And they'll speak twisted things to draw them after themselves. The person who's going to be the best false teacher is the one who can talk the talk. If you're trying to make a counterfeit $100 bill, you're not going to use a crayon to do it, right? what you're going to do is you're going to get the paper that's closest to the genuine. You're going to get the ink that's closest to the genuine. You're going to print it out as fake and you're going to pass it off as true. If we do that with money, do you think the forces of Satan are clever enough to do that with people? Go to the scriptures, see. So, I don't know if he's a false teacher. I think the text is saying he's a false teacher. I think he perished. I think God was interacting. I don't know how to quite get that. Clearly, God doesn't tempt anyone with evil, but God does show wicked people and allow them to do what they wickedly want to do. So I come to this text and I say, I'm not sure. I think the text is presenting him as a false teacher. And someone will say, does that mean true Christian leaders never sin? Well, absolutely not. Paul could say, I delight in the law of God in my inner being, but in my members I see another war waging against the law of my mind and taking me captive. There isn't any true teacher that you'll ever listen to who isn't massively plagued with sin. It was true of Moses. It's true of me. I want to be under God's law, but there are some things that I don't understand rightly. And then there are some things that I just choose not to submit to what God's Word says because I still have the remnants of the old self. And the truth is, you do too. The Bible isn't saying that your teacher has to be perfect, but the Bible is saying there is such thing as a false teacher. And we need to ask ourselves, ultimately, this is what convinced me when it described him as a guy who snakes, that he's somehow using Satan to do this, because it says people who are like that are an abomination to the Lord. So, I hope some light has come on the text, but be a Berean. Go and decide for yourselves and see what the text says, and I'll see you on Wednesday.